Hi, everybody. I'm going to turn this off. Hi, can you hear me? I have a new system where I won't be able to see anybody's name, but I can see now. Hi, Sarah Lydia. Hi, Bachelet. I'm going to say hi only for a few minutes. I have a new professional system set up, which is blinding me. I'm going to turn that off. Let's see. Okay, you can hear. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm going to chat for a few minutes as I can. Hi, Stephanie. Marcus Freed, who many of you know, has become my manager. No, he got me a light and a stand. So my phone is going to be further away from me, so I'm not going to be able to see anybody's name. But I think it might be easier just in terms of text. So I'm just going to say hi to everybody right now. How is everybody doing? Good. I'm talking to myself again. Sarah Lydia, what's it like in Yerushalayim on Tu B'Av? So my friend Sarah Lydia, who many of you don't know, but Bachelet knows, Stephanie, you're going to meet her. She's an amazing artist and photographer, so you will have a lot in common. And so she lives in the holy city of Yerushalayim. And today was a really special day in Yerushalayim. We're going to talk about it a little bit. It was the holiday of Tu B'Av. And, I see a little heart. The holiday of love. And we have a lot to talk about today, so I'm actually going to start soon in my rewarding those who come on time. Oh yeah, Stephanie, you will love Sarah Lydia. You just can't imagine. Really, her artwork and her devotion to the arts and to teaching. She once ran, when they were living in Miami, she's from France originally, and when they were living in Miami, she ran an art school for children, and she taught them how to see Hashem's world. Isn't that beautiful? Like, to see art in the way that this is Hashem's world and how beautiful Hashem's world is. And yeah, and she worked with kids that maybe some of the kids were having a difficult time, and she was able to reach them through art. And I'm sure, Stephanie, your writing and your inspiration and what you have to share, and everybody really in their own way has so many talents and so much to give and so much to offer that I can't wait till we see each other and we can share it together. So I have many things to say. She taught kids to see Hashem's world. Isn't that beautiful? And my son-in-law, or his husband Dove, is doing workshops now. He's actually doing one in Boston, but he's in Los Angeles. And I just saw my son, Maish, and my daughter-in-law, Shifra, on it, where he's doing like community building through songwriting. So, all of these things are so interesting that people can do and how they can share their talents and how they can go forward in life. So I'm sure everybody will be very excited. I have a little l'chaim with me tonight in my Sheva Chaya hand-blown glass cup. And if anybody wants, Sheva Chaya, it's under the name Sheva Chaya on Facebook, and she did like an hour-and-a-half class on Tu B'Av. I'm just going to do a small class on Tu B'Av, and then we're going to do the Parsha. But she teaches also every week on Facebook. But I don't think it's regular. I think whenever the mood strikes her. I mean, she does it every week, but that's how we are in Tzfat. In Tzfat, we live that way. Like when the mood strikes us, we produce. And there's also something very interesting that I'm sure it's on Facebook under the Ascent page, ASCENT, that Big Mo, who is one of the staff there, who my husband and I have worked with for years and years, he did in the beginning of this pandemic, he did, Sarah Lydia's having her first coffee with me. I love my first coffee in the morning. But Mo did a tour of Sfat. He did an artist tour of Sfat. Hi, Adrienne. So he, like, for an hour each day, he took you to a different part of Sfat. And he did like, because he gives tours of Sfat. So he did tours of, going into Sfat, down these streets and down those streets through the artist quarter. And then he also he's doing a series on different artists of Sfat. So that, it probably is under Ascent, A-S-C-E-N-T, Ascent of Sfat. Hi, Jill. Hi, Phyllis. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm getting more excited as the minutes roll by, and I'm going to have to pull my head back, and I'm not going to see anybody's name, but it's okay. I'll just visualize all of you. But it would be beautiful to, if you want to come to Sfat, just go, or Mordechai Sieve, S-I-E-V. So it's either under Ascent, or if you can't find it, you could text me. But I just want to say I was just on listening to a presentation that was given by an incredible woman, a Rebbitzin named Rifki Slanim, and she was doing it for one of my happy birthday to Myrna. It's Myrna's birthday. She's born on the day of love. Now, that will tell you something about Myrna. So, l'chaim, l'chaim. So yeah, go on Ascent, and you'll see very many interesting things. So I actually am going to start because there's a lot to teach, and I don't want to not teach it. As I said to my son Kobe tonight, somebody said, "How long do you teach?" I said, "Well, once I start, it's hard to stop, and I'm not really going anywhere, and neither is anybody else. So why not?" So I'm going to start. Hi, Barbara. So I'm going to periodically say hello to people, but not see them. So I don't want people to think I'm ignoring them. But I want to just start with what day this is today. And I have this lighting that I'm trying to adjust. You can see I'll probably never be a professional, but Marcus will have to tutor me some more. That's much better because it's not in my eyes. Fran, hi. I miss everybody so much. It's amazing. Sherry is my little angel. She drops packages at my door. Thank you so much. And Sherry, I'll tell you why I really appreciated it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel compelled to go to the store and buy me things. But I had to bring food to my daughter Hanala in her school. So I'll just share it today. My daughter Hanala, many of you know her. So she is severely handicapped, and she goes to a special school, and she's been going to special schools for many years. And it's only in recent years that, hi Shara, that she, look how good I could read from far away. I'll tell you the story of my glasses also. But, oh yeah, Jill names her plants after her friends. That also reminds me of a story. I think I'll just tell stories for a while. I'll tell you, I'm going to tell you the story. You name your plants. I once got a call from somebody, and he says, I really have to talk to you. And he said, I really have to ask you, it's a couple, and he says, I really, really have to ask you a question, and I hope you won't be insulted. And he's going on, and he starts to talk about this dog he has, and I really hope you're not going to be offended. And I'm thinking, oh no, he wants to give me this dog. And I'm like going, oh no, I really, I know he wants to give me this dog. And at the end of the whole conversation, he says to me, and I hope you don't mind, but I want to name the dog Olivia. So I said, as long as I don't have to have the dog, you can name the dog Olivia. So, hi Patrice. You'll be very happy I'm having a little chaim out of my hand-blown Sheva Chaya cup. So I forgot what was the first thing I started to say. I'm only just starting the little chaims, but I was started to tell you a story, and I don't remember what story I was going to tell you, but I'll start with a different story. So I lost my glasses yesterday. Oh, I know. I said I'm just going to forbrang a while till people come, till we start learning. So I lost my glasses, and what happened is that I think my head got thinner or my glasses got stretched out. So I found that for all the time I was just taking off my glasses because they kept sliding and they were getting more annoying, even though I can't see without my glasses. And I didn't want to go have my glasses fixed because I'm being super careful and I really don't want a glass person's face in mine to tighten up my glasses. So I don't really lose things. So I took them off yesterday. I was on the phone with an old friend of mine, a very old friend of mine, and I put them down somewhere and I couldn't find them anywhere. Absolutely. Somebody's giving me a glass tip, but I can't read because I have a new setup and I can't see the names now. I'm going to sit back. So I looked for like an hour for my glasses. I looked everywhere. I was only in 3 different places. I mean, I never leave my house. I don't know where they could have gone. And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm looking. And I never found them, actually. So I have this old pair that I used to wear. But the interesting part is, see, it's missing an arm. But it does have an arm. And the arm is downstairs, but it's broken. So I have to find somebody with super glue or a super talent to attach the arm. That's why I stopped wearing them and I got new glasses. So I decided today, why don't I take my own advice and give money to Mayor Balhanes. So there is a custom that if you lose, oh, 1 second. Amalei, I just want to wish you a refuah shlema, a complete healing. Everybody should say l'chaim. So, I was talking about Hanukkah. Thank you. Who is that told me that? Chaya. Okay, I'll finish. I'll tell you that in a minute. So I there's a custom that if you lose something, there's a man. His name was Mayor Balhanes, the mayor from the miracles, and there's a custom if you lose something, you give tzedakah to Rabbi Meir or one of his charities, and you'll find your lost object. So and his grave is in Tiberias, and I'll just share a true life personal story. So now I don't know if I want to find my old glasses because I really like these now, so I'm going to find a way to fix them. But so when Ora had her baby, Shlomo Yitzhak, who's now 2 years old, I was over there taking care of her, and I took her kids to school in her car because it had the car seats, and I had my purse, and I went into the kosher store and I bought a whole bunch of food to take home. And then I came home and I brought her car back, and I was looking for my car keys in order to transfer the food into my car, and I was going to drive home and sleep for the day, and I was staying over Ora's at night, and I couldn't find my car keys. And I looked in her car, and we looked all over her house, and then her housekeeper came and looked over the house, and I called the store, and my car keys were nowhere to be found. So I drove her car to my house. I got my spare set of keys. I drove back to her house, got my car, and when I came home, I dedicated money to Mayor Balhanes to help me find my car keys, because it's not like in the old days when you had a car key and it cost you $25 to replace. The new car keys can cost you like $600 or $700 to replace a car key. It's true. So I made a commitment that when I would go to Israel, which I was going in like 2 months, I gave money on the spot to a tzedakah box in the name of Mayor Balhanes. And I said, I will personally take money to his grave in Tiberias. And that was it. And I never found those keys. And 4 months later, I was in Tiberias. And I decided one day I would drive from Svat to Tiberias because I really needed to give that money that I pledged to Mayor Balhanes. And I go that morning and I give the money to Mayor Balhanes. And that afternoon, this is 100% true story, I get a call from Ora. They found my car keys. And where were my car keys? My car keys were under the seat of their car where I had looked, because I throw my purse on the floor and it must have fallen out. And I did look under the seat, but obviously if it was a chocolate bar, I might have found it, but it was keys and I must not have looked very well. And there they were, within the same 24-hour period that I actually gave the money to Mayor Balhanes. So I am going to give money to Mayor Balhanes to find my glasses that I lost yesterday. And when I find them, I'll let you know. So I'm going to start in 2 minutes, but I'll tell the story about Hanukkah. So Sherry, my angel, she asked me if I needed anything at the store. And I bring Hanukkah food. She's in a residential program. She can't come home because of the virus, so she has to stay there. Usually she would come home for the weekends. And she's in a special school. Now they're not going to school. They're just in this dorm facility. And there's like 5, residents with her and 3 staff. And they're very, very loving and they're very caring. And I go once a week and I bring her food. And Sherry, I'm telling this story because Sherry was able to get me yogurts today because part of the food I give her are kosher yogurts. So when I go, I have them take her out on the porch. And I stand on the other end of the porch because she's around quite a few people, and I play music, and I because she loves music and sings. So today, I was playing Mickey Moshe Shore. I don't know if anybody knows him, but he's on YouTube, and he has now 48 songs, and he's Hanukkah's favorite, and he was one of my dearest friends when I lived in Jerusalem. And I was on the porch with her for about a half hour, singing at the top of my lungs with her and dancing. And it reminded me of my 5-year-old granddaughter, Nava, who we have videos of with her father playing guitar on their porch, and she's like performing. And I thought, oh my God, I'm just like Nava. I'm performing right here on the porch for everybody to see with Hanukkah. So anyway, those are the stories I'm going to share before I begin. And so now we're going to begin the lesson. So l'chaim, and really everybody, thank you so much for coming. So today is a day that was called Tu B'Av. Tu is for the date. It's the 15th of the month of Av. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. My husband used to call it Sadie Hawkins Day. It's not exactly Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day, but he used to also call Lag Bomer, when everybody would go to the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Haredi Woodstock. So he had these little phrases. So what is Sadie Hawkins Day? It's called the Day of Love. It's called, many, many things happened on this day. Many things happened on the 15th of Av. But one of the things that happened is that the Jewish women, the girls and the women, would go out into the fields. And they would all they would dress in white, and they would exchange dresses so that it would be an equalizer, so that nobody would know, like who was rich, who was poor, who was what. Everybody knew that everybody's dresses, everybody's clothing was shared. And they would dance, and they would do circle dances. They would dance in circles. And they would tell the young men to lift up their eyes, and to understand this a little more, we're coming out of a time of great darkness. We're coming out of a time where we just had the holiday of Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day of the whole year. It's a day of tremendous destruction, and many, many things happened on that day. Things happened on that day, such as the spies came back from checking out the land of Israel with a false report. And because of their false report, the Jews were condemned to wander in the desert for 40 years before they were able to enter the land of Israel. So we're going to go into that a little. And it says that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, in the Talmud, it talks about, he says that there were no greater festivals in Israel than the 15th of Av, which is today, and Yom Kippur. That's interesting. Yom Kippur, which we take, is the holiest day of the year, and the 15th of Av, which is a day of circle dancing and celebration and going out into the fields and finding one's soulmate, finding one's shidduch. And it says, on these days, the daughter of Jerusalem would go out and dance in the vineyards. And what would they say? Young man, raise your eyes and see which you select for yourself. And what does that mean, raise your eyes? It means raise your eyes from this time of oppression, from this time of sadness, from this time of brokenness. That was the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the two holy temples that stood in Jerusalem, from the time that the spies came back with negative reports and many other things that happened during that time. Lift your eyes to a different reality, to a different possibility. And in a minute, we're going to go on with this teaching. But today, there was a worldwide prayer service. It started in Los Angeles at 7 a.m. It was coordinated all over the world with different times. And it was to pray for all of those people who needed to get married and need a soulmate. And I want you to know that I really prayed for everybody. I prayed for everybody who's part of my family and my friends and my adopted family and people who come to my classes. So if you were single, you were on a list of huge amounts of people that were being prayed for today, that you should find your right soulmate. And I just want to, and they kept emphasizing that not only are people praying in, New York and Russia and in Europe and in Israel and in California and in Kansas and in Iowa and all over the world. Everybody was connected. And there was different teachings and saying of about 8 Psalms that we all said together. But in Amukah, in Israel, there was a group of people that were praying there together and had everybody's names. I don't think they read everybody's names, but they took everybody's names to the grave. And I want to tell you a minute about Amukah. So Amukah is the burial place of Yonatan ben Uziel. His yahrzeit is somewhere in the beginning of June. And in Ascent, every year we would have a seminar called the Valley of Love, so in honor of him. And it says that Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel never married, and he wanted to learn Torah, he wanted to commune with God, and at the end of his life he realized that was a mistake, that that's not what Torah teaches, and that he should have married. And so he made a promise that whoever would come to his grave, he would be an intercessor and help daven for them. Because when you go to the grave of a tzaddik, when you go to the grave of a holy person, you're not praying to that person. That person is your partner in prayer. And you're praying with their merit, and you're hoping that they will join in order that your prayers will be carried to the highest heavens, and hopefully God will answer you. And I hope that everybody who is prayed for today will find their holy soulmate in the right person with ease and clarity. So I want to tell you my favorite Amukah story. This is really absolutely my favorite Amukah story. And I have permission to tell it because I took permission to tell it. I've been telling it for years. And it happens to do with some dear friends of mine. So there was there was an organization in Israel that I have wonderful friends. They live on Modin. Their names are Avram Aryeh and Rachel Trugman. And they ran a program for English speakers from all the colleges in universities in Israel called Vista. They ran it for many, many years. And what they would do is they would do outings, and they do classes, and they would do Shabbatons. So they were going away for a Shabbaton for a weekend and some touring up north. And they hired this woman, Naomi, to be the photographer of the group. She lived in Israel at the time. She was American. She was visiting, but she was there for a period of time. And they hired a young man who was a musician, and they hired him to do the singing and the prayers and to do the services, but at each grave to do drumming and singing and make it something deep, something where people could connect. So they get to Amukah, and everybody's getting off the bus in Amukah because they're explaining that this is the grave where you come to pray for your holy soulmate. And everybody gets off the bus, and they're all going to pray. And the person who is the music person realizes after they get to where the grave is of Yonatan ben Uziel, that he forgot his drum. And he wants to do like a drum circle. So he goes back to the bus, and he gets on the bus, and he sees this woman sitting on the bus, and he goes, "Why didn't you get off the bus?" She's the photographer who's with him. She goes, "Because I am not interested." He goes, "What do you mean you're not interested? You don't want to pray for your soulmate?" She said, "No, I don't. I don't want to get married now. I'm not interested." And he goes, "How could you not pray for your soulmate?" She goes, "I don't want to. I'm not interested right now." And he kept saying, "You're not praying for, I can't believe that you're here and you're not going to pray for your soulmate." And finally she says, "Okay, I'll get off the bus and I'll pray for my soulmate." Guess who it is? The girl was Naomi Solomon and the guy was Yehuda Solomon. And they got married 3 years later, and I was at their wedding in Yerushalayim. So that is my favorite Amuka story, that they prayed for their soulmates, and it was each other, and they didn't know it at the time. So really, l'chaim, everybody should be blessed with the right person. So let's continue this teaching. There's a few things on Tu B'Av that I want to teach, and then we're going to talk about the Parsha. So it's very interesting. It's comparing this 15th of the month of Av, which is today, which is the full moon, with Yom Kippur. So it says this was a day for matchmaking, and also we know that Yom Kippur and the 15th of Av are 2 days that have to do with betrothal and marriage, because there's a marriage between us and God, really, on Yom Kippur. And that's the day on which the second tablets were given to Moses, which fulfilled the covenant that we were betrothed and then like married through the commandments, through the 10 commandments to God on Mount Sinai. And this is the day that we were betrothed to God, was the day of Yom Kippur. And it says, what's the 15th of Av? It's a day of rebirth, because we were in such a descended place. The 9th of Av has to do with descending. And what do you need? It says first there's a descent and then an ascent. So the 15th of Av followed the 9th of Av. And it says that this will be the culmination, the ultimate day of Mashiach. It says that the Mashiach will come on the 9th of Av. The Mashiach will be born on the 9th of Av. And it says, so the Talmud is relating that the daughters of Jerusalem, meaning Israel, will go out and dance in the vineyards. And I actually went to a dance party last night in my own living room. If anybody knows Karen Sarto, she does dance parties, and we did a Zoom dance party for Tu B'Av. And it says that the women would go out, the girls would go out into the vineyards, and whoever didn't have a wife would go out to find himself a bride. And there were 3 different categories of daughters, and how each would call out to her prospective bridegroom. I'm just going to list it. We're not going to go into it in depth. But one of the things we have to understand also, not only were there 3 different categories of daughters, but there are also 3 combined in different stages of life for women. So the first category said in the Talmud, what would the beautiful ones among them say? Look for beauty, for a woman is for beauty. What would those of prestigious lineage say? Look for family, for a woman is for children. So the first stage is the beauty stage, and the second stage is the family stage, and then comes the older stage. What would the ugly ones say? Make your acquisition for the sake of heaven, as long as you decorate us with jewels. That's interesting. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that the marriage of God and us, the nation of Israel, includes 3 different categories of brides. The souls of Israel include beautiful souls, souls of prestigious lineage, and ugly souls, each which contribute their own unique dimension in a relationship with God. So just to clarify the last point. So we're clear, what does it mean by ugly souls? We're not going to go into the other ones at this point, but if anybody wants to learn more, they can go on Sheva Chaya's Facebook page on, and she talks about Tu B'Av, and I think she might go into the different categories. So it says, and the ugly ones, this is who it's describing as the ugly ones. Those who have neither roused their minds and hearts to desire their Creator, nor awakened their hereditary loyalty to Him. Those who never generated a self-created love, and because it says there are two types of love. There's the love that's a gift, and there's a love that's inborn. So those who never generated a self-created love and whose inborn love lies dormant under a squalid veneer of apathy and iniquity, they cry, make your acquisition for the sake of heaven. Do it for your sake, if not for ours, calls the ugly souls of Israel. Take us as your own, despite our appearance, because only you know what lies behind our appearance, and only you know the truth of what you inspire in us. Because the truth is, the daughters of Israel are beautiful. It is only that poverty obscures their beauty. You know that our ugliness is not our true essence, but imposed upon us by the spiritual poverty of exile. Again, the spiritual poverty of exile brings this disconnection from our true essence. And we're going to pick this thought up when we study this week's Torah reading, the Parsha. If we have failed to realize our potential for beauty and fruitfulness, then it is left to you to decorate us with jewels, to shower us with the gifts that will waken our bond to you and bring to light our perfection that's within. So that we're disconnected from our source. That's what it's talking about. And okay, so let's go on. We're going to leave this for now because there's something else very, very interesting about the 15th of Av that I want to go into before we go into the Parsha. So it says, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, that there were never such great days of joy as the days of the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. So the Gemara explains that when the Jews were in the desert on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, so the spies came back and they gave this bad report. And so they were condemned they had to wander in the desert for 40 years. And then they would be allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael when that generation died out. So what would happen? On Tisha B'Av, all the men would dig a grave. That's right. They would dig their own graves. And then they would go to sleep that night and they would lie down in those graves. And in the morning, 15,000 would not get up. This happened year after year for 39 years. And in the 39th year, the men, going into the 40th year, the men stopped dying. And they saw that they all got up. So they were like shocked because now there were 15,000 left. And they were supposed to die out. And now they didn't die because how did they know? Because on the 9th of Av, when they went into the graves, then they got up the next morning and they were still here. So there's many things having to do with this day, but I want to say, so what happened is they went to Moshe and he said, you're not allowed to go into the land of Israel. Meanwhile, for these 39 years, they were doing tshuva. All the men were doing tshuva. So even the ones that would die from year to year, they were asking for forgiveness and they were returning to God. So when these 15,000 got up and it was Tisha B'Av and they didn't die, then every day Moshe said, go back into the grave. You're not allowed to go into the land of Israel. And they went back in and they did more tshuva meaning return, examining one's soul, trying to connect to God, developing a relationship. And they would get up and when it became the 15th of Av and they saw that full moon, and Moshe said he realized their tshuva was accepted and they would be allowed to go into the land of Israel. Also, what happened on the 15th of Av, this is very, very interesting. I just want to say that I did study, I want to just say something about divine providence. So I get in the mail every week for years a book called Chayenu, which has the Chumash for the day, the Rambam for the day, the Tanya for the day, the many, many Torah teachings for the day. And I study the daily, we've talked about it before, it's called Chitash, Chumash, Tanya, Tehillim. I study this every morning. And last week, for the first time in years, it didn't arrive. So I have a dear friend in New York who buys me a subscription. And I called her up and I said, you don't have to get me a new subscription, but I just want to know if it's like the mail or it ran out. So she said, no, I have it continuing forever till Mashiach comes. So I called them up and they said they've been having some problems with the mail. I hope the mail system's not collapsing, whatever, because I always get them weeks in ahead and I still haven't gotten them. So I got in touch with this organization. They said, they have it also digitally and they'll give me a free month until mine come. So because of that, before I got that, I realized I'm now going to have to use like real books and real sources. It's not going to be all in one place. So I actually discovered on Chabad.org a whole new treasure house of teachings for each week's Parsha under the book of Devarim, under the book of Deuteronomy. For each of the 5 books, there's 50 different people, rabbis and rebbitzins teaching. And I was just so excited. So what looked like bad news and me not getting my correct mail turned out to be like a gift that I'm exposed to teachers that I never learned with before. So I went on one of them. I looked at one that was like not an hour. I'm looking for one that's a little shorter. And it was a rabbi who I happen to know who he is, but I've never done any classes with him. His name is Aaron Raskin. I think he's in Brooklyn Heights. And I studied a teaching with him, and then I studied teaching by Yossi Jacobson, and then I studied. So it was very exciting. So these are my sources. So this particular teaching I heard from Rabbi Raskin, and so I'm going to share it with you. And then there's another one that kind of folds into it, that from Yossi Jacobson and then from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I might repeat one or two things, but I'm going to weave them together. Okay, so it says that on the 15th of Av, they stopped cutting wood for the altar. So we know that in the Beis HaMikdash, there were many, many sacrifices. There are lots of sacrifices because there are lots of Jews. And people brought community sacrifices and there were individual sacrifices. And each individual, either it was a Thanksgiving or maybe they sinned a lot and they had to bring a lot of sacrifices. So in order for the sacrifices to be burnt, you needed wood. Now they're in a desert. Okay, and where did they get the wood? So there were certain families. It's very interesting. I'm not going to go into all the details, but there are certain families that were given the privilege, really, and the job to raise these forests and cut the wood and prepare the wood. And it says that they stopped cutting the wood for the altar on the 15th day of the month of Av, Tu B'Av, today. And why did they stop? Because the sun from today on in the desert in Israel decreases in its heat. So if wood would not be totally dried out from being burnt, from being hot and dried out from the heat, if the wood is not totally dried out and there's any moisture in it, it could have worms and bugs, and that would absolutely be forbidden to have any kind of creepy crawling animal that's impure on the altar. So this was a day that the sun diminished, and therefore the wood was stopped to be cut on this day, on the 15th of Av. And it's also called the Day of the Broken Axes, because on that day they broke the axes also that were used to chop the wood, and I'll explain why in a minute. So also it says, I just want to go back to one thing that the Gemara talks about the women dancing on Tu B'Av, that they danced in a circle. Circles are very interesting. We know that a wedding ring is a circle, that a chassan goes around the bride, makes circles, 7 circles around the bride. And it says, in the future time, in the Messianic time, God will make a circle for the tzaddikim, for the righteous ones. And then God will sit among them in the circle. And it says, and at that time, every Jew will be a tzaddik. Every Jew will be on that righteous level. And each will point to God and say, this is our God. So this will happen after the second stage of the coming of Mashiach, which includes the resurrection of the dead. And that's for another time, but it's a very interesting to understand this. And it says the body will be refined and it will sit with God and it will join in the circle, just like a groom circles around the bride. So let's continue. So it also goes on to say that during this time that the Jews had finished dying, just to go back to a point before, it says that at that time that they finished, they were forgiven, totally forgiven. And one of the things that's in this week's it's in this week's Torah reading, it was in last week's Torah reading, is the Shema. And we know that the Shema is the last prayer that a person says before they die. And during those 6 days of doing tremendous tshuva, that last 15,000 of the men were praying, is they said Shema every night, but they were hoping to get up in the morning. So they knew this would be the last thing they said. I actually was kicked out of Sunday school when I was in 8th grade because I laughed at I think I shared this once before. I went to a Reformed temple in Lawrence, New York, and I had a teacher who's very dramatic. Well, to me, he was dramatic because I had no idea what he was talking about because we never really learned about the Shema. We didn't really learn about anything. And so he's talking about how in a battlefield, the last prayer that a Jew will say is the Shema. And he talked about seeing soldiers. It must have been in World War II. I can't imagine otherwise. And he said, and they were dying on the battlefield and they yelled at Shema, and he just yelled out at the top of his lungs to demonstrate Shema, and I started to laugh hysterically, and then I was kicked out of Sunday school. But because I didn't believe it. I had no idea what he was talking about. But it is the last prayer, and it's a prayer we say at night, and it's a prayer we say in the morning. And if you don't yet say Shema, it really is a beautiful thing to add to your saying, thank you, God, for giving back my soul, and to have this attitude of gratitude. It's a poem. Okay, so it says that in this time, when the Kabbalah talks about when Mashiach comes, the name, I'm not going to go into it, but the name of God will be changed. I mean, it will be the name of God, but the letters will be used that will be different. Because it says now, when we have the name of God and we spell it out with a yud and a hey, and then also a vav and a hey, it says the vav indicates the 6 emotions that a person has, which are kindness, restraint, beauty, endurance, victory, splendor, foundation, and royalty. So it represents these qualities and intimacy, and we know that we can siphon off energy that might not be, that can be distracted and distorted. But it says in the future when Mashiach comes, the letters will be only a yud and then a hey and then a yud and a hey again, which represents the two intellectual emotions that we call chachma, wisdom, and bina, understanding. And we say that those are two friends that that never separate. So there will be no ability to draw negatively from their energy, and there will be no impurity. There will be only holiness. It will be a time of only holiness. And it says that death has to do with impurity, and everything about the service in the temple was about purity, holiness. Really, a person had to be holy to step into the temple. So that's just a side note. So it says that they stopped cutting the wood at that time on the 15th of Av for the altar, and they broke the axe. And it says that the month of Av is called the month of the lion, and there's a midrash, which is a commentary, that says that the lion came in the month of the lion and destroyed the lion. And who is the lion that destroyed? He was Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the Beis Hamikdash in the month of Leo, which is the month of the lion. And it will be rebuilt in this month also, and it will be larger and greater than every before. And we will have this our temple back, and it says that the presence of God will dwell there, and it will radiate into the whole entire world. So now the wood that was brought that represented love, because what do we know about the temple? Why was the temple destroyed? The temple was destroyed because of causeless hatred. And what does the wood represent? It represents an abundance of love. Why? Because the families that were in charge of the wood, they prepared the wood. And how did they prepare the wood? They went into the hot sun. Have you ever been in, you should come snorkeling with me in Eilat in the summer. It's hot. Israel is hot in the summer. And what did they do? They chopped the wood and they prepared the wood for the sacrifices for people that they did not know. And not only for people they did not know, for people who were sinners, because not all the sacrifices were community sacrifices. Some of them people brought for terrible sins, for gossip and for thievery and for what many things. We don't have to go into what sins are. Everybody can use your own imagination. Okay, so it says that this wood they gave as a charity for all Jews. It wasn't even a mitzvah to give the wood. The mitzvah was the sacrifices. They were just preparing the sacrifices. So their tremendous love for another gave this wood in order for other people to be able to reconnect and reestablish their relationship with God. Because if they couldn't bring, what did the sacrifices represent? They represented bringing that animal part of yourself in control and offering it up on an altar to God, meaning you want to bring holiness and godliness into your animal self, into your animal soul. So this wood was given like tzedakah as a charity, and it helped all Jews. And it was a great mitzvah, a great commandment to give it. And they created a greater unity because they helped heal people and they helped people to have this relationship with God. And why was it called the Day of the Broken Axes? Because once the axes were fixed, could no longer be used, because after the 15th of Av, you were not allowed to prepare wood. You were not allowed to cut wood until the 1st of Nisan the following year. It's only like a 4.5 month period that you could actually chop the wood and prepare it. And it says, why did they break the axes? Why didn't they just put them in a storehouse, put them away somewhere, and they can use them the next year? So the Mishnah tells us you're not allowed to use iron to cut stone for the altar. Why? Because iron, an axe, they would be afraid they would use it to chop the stone. And how were the stone cut? How were the stones cut? It says there was this worm called the shamir that cut the stones, whatever. Somebody could do a research project and report back. because it says that iron, which is used for war, shortens the life of a person. And the reason for the sacrifices was to add life to the person, that the person should be able to come close to God, to do tshuva for whatever they did wrong, tshuva meaning return, and that they would become close to God to lengthen the life. So this cutting of the wood that was given by these families was to create unity, but the axes had to be destroyed, had to be broken, because we don't want an implement that's for war to be used in a place of peace that would shorten the life of man, because the altar is supposed to lengthen the life of man. So it says that this was a day of tremendous charity, and all the wood would start to be used without ever being able to be replenished until the next Nisan, which is the first of the year, and this was tzedakah. So it says this brought great joy because the ultimate breaking of the axe represents the end of exile. And this was an ultimate donation, a community offering. And what did it say? It was an awareness that your joy is my joy, that you can reach your closeness to God, and I can take pleasure in you reaching that closeness to God by being generous and giving you the wood in order to make a sacrifice. And it says there were 5 donations of wood that happened in the month of there's nine different times I think that the wood was given, but 5 of those times was in the month of, and it was a privilege for certain families. And it says that that your yearning to get closer to God is my yearning to get closer to God. So they had to wait till the next year to replenish the wood, but they gave it generously. They didn't hoard some on the side in case they would need it. They gave it, and we have to remember, they gave it to those who were sinners. I mean, it's such an incredible concept that they just gave it openly to everyone, so another could replenish their relationship with God. So it says, who were these families? Who are these people? Who are these great people? And it says that they were descendants of Ruth from Moab, Ruth the Moabitess. So we talked about I think we talked in this class. Well, if you're in my Wednesday class at some point, and if you're in my now Facebook Wednesday class, I think we talked about the book of Ruth. It's a beautiful book to learn, but we know that what happened with Ruth, that Ruth was a convert, and she was the ancestor of King David, and that she really set the tone for clinging to truth. Why did she convert? She went with Naomi, who had no money, who was destitute, who was returning as an old, bitter woman, so there was no prestige. She didn't know the end of the story. She never read the book of Ruth. She didn't know how that story was going to turn out. All she knew was that she's coming with Naomi, and she's going to be looked down on, and she's going to be a beggar. That's all she knew at that time. And that is what happened, is that she went with Naomi, but she had this sense in her soul, she wanted truth, and the truth was she had to live as a Jew. So it says these families, this is where, the families that gave the wood, this is where they got their devotion from. They were descendants of Ruth. And she went on this journey, and what happened, this happened 6 centuries later, after Ruth was alive. And it affected her descendants for all these generations. And they were the ones who put the wood on the altar, and they stood in the heat, and they cut the wood for others. And they didn't even have the pleasure of offering the sacrifices. All they did was prepare the wood. And they were behind the scenes. And it says that and they gave it to the temple. And that is why, one reason why this day, the 15th of Av, is compared to Yom Kippur. That it is like Yom Kippur, because what was the uniqueness of Yom Kippur, even though Yom Kippur happened once a year? So he says we know that there every day we pray to God 3 times. And on Shabbos and holidays, there's an additional service called the Musaf service. And on those days, we pray 4 times. But what happens on Yom Kippur? We pray 5 times. There are 5 services. So we know that in the soul, in the Jewish soul, there are 5 levels of the soul. The first level is nefesh. It's a level of like basic consciousness. Ruach is the next level, which is a deeper level, and it's emotional consciousness. Neshama is a deeper level, and it's a deeper awareness. The level of chaya, which means life, is deeper. It's yearning for meaning and spiritual transcendence. And what is the highest level or the deepest level? It's called yechida, and it's called one. One with oneness, divine. It has no definition. It's the core of your soul with the divine. It's the essential place of truth. That's the place Ruth came from, that essential place of Ruth. It's invisible. And only on Yom Kippur does that dimension emerge. It emerges on the core level. And what does it say? Like it talks about, before we were talking about the ugliness of the daughters, it says you were never detached. It's only just covered up. And Rambam says that this day atones if we do tshuva. And it says there's a certain energy in the world that you are never detached from, a certain core place in your soul, a place where sin never touched, where going away from the word of God never touched. And this 5th prayer, this of Yom Kippur, touches this place of Yechida. And what is the 5th prayer? It's called the Ne'ilah prayer, the closing prayer. But what does that mean? It means, as the gates of heaven are closed, guess where you are? Inside. You're inside that closed gate, just like in a Yichud room. So we're bringing it back to this level of the 15th of Av that has to do with soulmates and marriage and relationships. Because it says what happens after a bride and groom, the groom puts on the ring, which is a circle, and then he circles 7 times, and then they go into what's called the Yichud room, a room of aloneness, where only the bride and groom are in, and no one else. And for them, that the day of their marriage is like Yom Kippur, a complete atonement. So they're closed in, only one with the other. And it says that so this day of 15th of Av, this day of the ultimate looking for the soulmate, is compared to Yom Kippur. And it represents a different type of Judaism. It's that you're not doing a mitzvah. You're not preparing for somebody else to do the mitzvah. This is where your soul is truthful. This is where your soul really lives. It represents the real connection and the commitment. It says, what is the best day for marriage? It operates on many levels, but when we choose this day of the 15th of Av, the day that the Jews stopped cutting wood, that was a deep day. And there was a relationship that there's a relationship between those who were giving the wood, those who were receiving it, or a relationship of trust. So it says that we want for a relationship to thrive when a person can tune in, what does the other person want that I can give? Because we have to have this level of total trust. And we can't ask why. Like the question is that when there's an estrangement between God and a person, it's like a bad marriage. Because the ultimate relationship is love. The ultimate relationship is, why are you doing it? Well, there is no such thing as why. Why, it doesn't exist. It's the truth of your soul. I'm doing it because we are one. And it says, Ruth had no why. Why did she follow Naomi? It was the truth of her soul. So it's interesting. Here's a little side story. It says that, and then we'll transition into the Parsha. It says that the Baal Shem Tov was asked who his soul was. So for anybody who doesn't know, the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement, and he revealed himself at a certain point in his life, and he taught about love. He taught about joy, serving God with joy and love of a fellow Jew, and this place of unity and oneness to God. So somebody asked him, who was your soul before? Like, how did you get this soul? How did you get this tremendous soul? So he told his story, and the reason I picked this story is because it has to do with Sfat, and I'm missing Sfat very much. Okay, I love Sfat, and I hope Sfat loves me and wants me back. So it says that there was a Jew that lived in Sfat a few generations earlier, and there was a knock on his door one day, and somebody appeared at this door, and he was asked, "What did you do?" This Jew was asked, "What did you do on the day of your bar mitzvah? I know that you did something that turned the heavens around, but I don't know what you did." And he says, "It's none of your business. I'm not saying." And the person comes back again, and he says, "No, I want to know, what did you do on the day of your I just want to say I'm staring. I'm not saying hello to anybody because now my phone is the distance away that I cannot see anybody's name. So I just was checking to see if maybe my sound was off, but it's not. Okay. So he says, I'm Eliyahu. I'm Eliyahu HaNavi. I'm Eliyahu the prophet. And I want to know, what was the specific thing you did that turned the heavens around? And he said, it's none of your business. He said, I'll learn with you. I'll study with you. Now that was a huge thing. If like Eliyahu the prophet, Eliyahu HaNavi, Eliyahu comes to every bris, Eliyahu whose body just ascended into heaven and didn't die, comes to you and says, you tell me your secret and I'll learn with you every day. Appealing, no? So it says, the Jew looked up and he said, what I did for God alone. And I won't give up what it was. And it says that soul of that man went into Eliyahu and went into the Baal Shem Tov. And this was the core of his teachings, was everything you do, that you're doing for God. You're doing it for God. That's who you're doing it for. You're doing it for God. So that's a little bit about Tu B'Av. If you want to learn more about it, there's so many teachings on the computer, and you can actually go to my new spot that I found through Divine Providence. If you go on Chabad.org and you look up videos under the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, you'll find like 150 of them at least. I don't want to exaggerate. And some of them are 2 minutes, and some of them are 40 minutes, and some of them are an hour, and I'm sure that they're all absolutely fascinating on so many different levels. Okay. So I want to just say about this book we're now in the Parsha called Eikev. Eikev, the word actually refers to heel. I'm not going to go into why. We're going to go into one part of the Parsha. The Parsha is also chock full. If you want to learn more, I'm teaching one small aspect. Go and look on something on Eikev. There's also 50 video teachings on it. You can listen in your car. Today when I was driving, it's a distance to go to Honolulu and back, I listened to a tape. And then when I was doing my exercises, I listened to a tape. So you can just listen, and there's so much to learn, and we're only doing a tiny part. But it says that because the grace after meals, the benching after meals, the prayers that you say after meals are found in this week's Parsha, we have to know that this Parsha we can focus on gratitude. Why are we called Yehudim? That's the way Jews are called. We're called Yehudim, Jews. Why aren't we called Hebrews or Israelites? Because it says, it comes from the word Yehuda, which means to offer thanks and to show gratitude. And we need to show gratitude. It's so important. You know, I think I mentioned it last week that somebody phoned me to say what a tremendous blessing my son Kobe's music, which you can hear on Spotify, was for her son, how he was having a hard time and how it brought him so much joy and calmness. You know, show gratitude to people. It's very, very rare. And we have to recognize not what we're lacking. Everybody knows what they're lacking, but what we have. We have to really count our blessings. We have to recognize goodness. So we're called for that. We're called Yehudim for gratitude. So we need to express gratitude to be open and express gratitude. So I'm just going to have a little l'chaim between Tu B'Av and Eikev in my Sheva Chaya hand-blown glass. Many of you might not know that my brother was a glass blower. And I spent some of my younger years having a lot of fun going with my brother in the 1960s, probably, let's see, 1965. I don't know exactly the first year the Renaissance Fair started, maybe 1966, 1967. But we used to go, and my brother would have this booth, and you'd dress up as Renaissance characters, and you would just be in another altered state of consciousness, and it was just the most fun. And selling his glass, and he was a glass blower, and it was very, very exciting times, to say the least. So I love hand-blown glass. He didn't do these kind of pieces. He did, oh, there, I think that's Sheva Chaya. Yay! See? And I'm back to wine. So Sheva Chaya was just pushing your Tu B'Av class. I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, but I hope people, we just finished learning about Tu B'Av, so I hope people will go to learn more, because I only touched a little bit of it. So, okay, so we're going to talk about Parsha's Eikev. This is such a beautiful Parsha. There's so much in it. So let's just start. So at first we're going to say, we're just going to reflect on the Haftarah. So for anybody who might not know, the Haftarah is read after the Torah portion. And it says also that from the 9th of Av, which was last week, last Shabbos, until Rosh Hashanah, there are 7 weeks. And on each of the Shabboses, the Haftarahs talk about words of encouragement and consolation. And we also know that the Haftarah represents or reflects what's in the weekly Parsha. And so that this Parsha also will talk about redemption. All these Parshas will talk about redemption. And also, really, the whole entire Torah relates to redemption. Because why? Because Torah study frees the soul from the exile of the body and the animal soul. And this frees the body from literal exile, from what we call gullus, exile. And it says, if the Yetzer Hara, which is called the despicable one that wants to trick you, assails you, you lead them to the house of learning. And this will dissolve them. So I wanted to, this week, do a teaching from last week's Parsha, which because it was Tisha B'Av, we only learned about Tisha B'Av. So I might incorporate it next week, and it's about the cities of refuge. But because we were learning this week about Tu B'Av, I didn't want to make the class till midnight, even though I really am not going anywhere or doing anything. But you might have a more exciting life than I do. So, oh, and I forgot to say the ultimate l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim to my brand new great-grandson. His name is Mordechai Leib. And he had his bris yesterday, and he's just the cutest baby. So I want to say l'chaim to the whole entire Schwartz family and the Chain family and the Maraza family. We have a lot of hyphens in there, but not really, for the birth of this beautiful boy. And he should really usher in Mashiach and bring holiness and unity and health and healing for everybody in the world that needs a healing. So l'chaim. Okay, now I'm going to go for the water in my Sheva Chaya wine cup, because you want me to be able to finish the class. Okay, so it says the Torah speaks about different subjects, and this in the Parshas of these 7 weeks of consolation, we're going to speak actually about the redemption itself. But first we have to understand what state we're in. We're in a state called gullus, exile. And we need to understand how we got here. We need to understand what the cause of exile and gullus is in order to know how to remedy it, how to get out of it. Because we correct the cause, if we can correct the cause, remove the effect, and then we can have redemption, and then we'll be happy. Okay? and we'll be holier, and we'll live in the presence of God, and we'll be reunited with our loved ones, and there will be peace in the world, and we'll be in Sfat, all of us together. So it goes on to say that this can be compared to a physically ill person. The person is aware of their illness, and they're aware of their symptoms, and they go to see a physician, a doctor, and they will list what's wrong for the doctor. They will tell them what their symptoms are, and then the doctor will know what medicine to prescribe, and then the person will be healed. The knowledge, first of all, that one is sick and recognizing the symptoms, that's already a big step, because there are so many that are sick and they couldn't even list this. They're so unaware of what the symptoms are. So to acknowledge that you're sick, to recognize the symptoms is on the way to the cure. And it will eventually bring about the other half of the cure, which is to bring the person to full health. And it says it is likewise with being in exile. An understanding of what exile means, what it is, and its cause is the beginning of redemption. And it will lead one to find ways to cure the condition of exile and leave it to go into what we call the good and spacious land. So we're going to go on to see what this means. So it says the Jewish people had to wander through a vast desert before entering into the good and spacious land that we call Israel. And it says what happens to our ancestors are an indication for the children of the ancestors, which are actually us. So there's a basic concept that what happens to the patriarchs and matriarchs is a sign for the children. And God gave Abraham this sign that what will happen to him will happen to his descendants in the future. The Torah discusses the desert because it is an indication for us, and it's described in the following way: as a vast and dreadful desert with serpents. Doesn't sound fun. Serpents, vipers, and scorpions, and of thirst where there is no water. And all these are various details of the desert, and they relate to our exile, and they relate to us today in 2020. And it says, if we can understand what these details mean, it will enable us to have some level of consolation, because we'll know what we need to do in order to heal the condition we're in order to leave the exile and enter this good and spacious land. First of all, a desert is not a place for people to settle in. You know, it's interesting, many years ago, one of my daughter-in-laws, I won't say who was living in Israel, and she was a few weeks before her birth of her first child. She and her husband decided that they rented a car, and they called me up. I was in America, and I was going to go to Israel when she had her baby. When she called me, she was in labor. And they said that since the baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, they rented a car and they were going to drive to Eilat for like 3 nights, like their last vacation before they had this baby. And I went, no, you're not. I said, you're not going to drive to Eilat. There is 4.5 to 5 hours of nothing when you drive through that desert. Nothing. When I mean nothing, well, there's the rock of Lot's wife, and there might be like a palm tree or two with a little moshav, and that is it. And I said, if you go into labor in the desert, you will be in a place where there is nothing. And luckily, they listened, and they were able to use that car a few hours later to drive to the hospital where she had a baby. And it would not have been a good situation if she was in the middle of the desert. So the desert is a place not for people to settle in. it says that, and it's this vast desert, and it's occupied by wilderness, devoid of human habitation, and it is larger than the area of settlements and places where people live. The deserts are vast. I remember when I lived in India, I met a couple from England and their 2 children and their Land Rover that had driven across with a caravan of people across the Sahara Desert for days, and maybe it was for months. I don't know how long, just endless desert, desert, desert. So it says the term Adam, which means man, refers to Jews. It says that you are called man, you are called Adam. So there's a sefer, there's a book called, there is, trust me, a book, and explains the word Adam. And it says here that when a person attaches themselves to above, to God above, and likens themselves to God, meaning emulating God, blessing God, walking in the path of God, then the person is called by the essential name, which means man, means I shall be like the Most High. But if one separates themselves from this attachment, then they're called from the name Adamah, which means soil or ground from where one was taken. Like dust, one comes from dust and will be returned to dust. Because the principal purpose of a person is to emulate God, to reflect godliness on high. And it says that after the sin of Adam, the word Adam indicates the earthly characteristic of from dust of the ground and not the reflection of godliness above. And it says that, but we are compared, I will be like, we will say, the reason we have this potential to be called in the name of God, in the name of Adam, meaning the higher supernal man, is because we will be like the Most High. It's very deep. These things are very deep, the potential that we are in and where we can go to. So this vast desert that we entered, which is unfit for human habitation, is larger than the area that it is fit for, meaning we are called the smallest of all the nations. And we are a minority among all the nations, and even among Jews themselves. Those who even know about observing Torah or properly observe Torah and mitzvahs, commandments, are for the time being in the minority, not the majority. My husband used to call, when people would say, like how many Jews are in LA? And he'd say, well, 75% we call Jews for nothing. That's the largest group in LA. Yeah, there were 600,000 Jews at the time. I don't know how many today in LA, but 75% had not affiliated with any type of congregation, not affiliated with being Jewish at all. So we're saying that we're in this vast area and we feel small in this vast area. So it says the first reference to the exile is called a vast desert. Not just a desert, but a vast desert. So it says, so remember, we're looking at what brought us into this state of exile. Not only physical exile, but this mental condition of exile, mentally being in Gullus. So it says the first cause and the first step in the descent leading into the exile is a perception of the world around us is greater than we are. Very important. Like we could feel inferior to the world around us, and we feel that so vast. What hope is there? And the settled area, meaning the area where we live as Jews and the area where we practice our Yiddishkeit, is perceived as a small place, and the world around it, meaning the desert, meaning the nations of the world, is a vast space, something that is greater than we are. And it says that in the Haftarah this week, though, it says, kings will be your nurturers and their princesses your nurses. Meaning we do have the power, we can overcome that, but not everybody feels that. And we feel, especially when we're seeing so much anti-Semitism that is being out in the open more, people feel it's vast, and we feel small in comparison to how to deal with it. So it says, the Gemara is saying that all the people on the earth will see the name of God is called upon you, and they will be afraid of you. So how will they see it? So this refers to tefillin. So in the boxes of tefillin, one of the things that are written are the verses of the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And it says that when a Jew's head, when a Jew's being is upon this and has this in the front of its eye saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," and our minds are absorbed in the awareness of the Almighty, that God is the authority over the whole world, then other people will be able to see it also. And it says they will be afraid. So it goes on to say that the word Echad, Shema Yisrael, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, Echad, that verse signifies by the numerical equivalent of the letters that God is one. Meaning God is the exclusive authority over the seven heavens above and the earth below. So we have the Aleph, which is one. We have the Chet, the letter Chet, in the word Echad, which is 8, the seven heavens and the earth below. And in all four directions, east, west, north, and south, which is the Daled of the word Echad, and it is equal to 4. So it says when one calculates that there is a vast desert and attributes significance to the world with an argument that the world is large and we are small, then a person says, how can Yaakov stand for he is small? So that is a question. And raising this question attributes significance to the world, and then one affects within themselves the state of exile. Remember, we're looking to understand what is the malady of Gullus, what is the qualities that brought us into exile, and then we're going to find what is the remedy to get out of it. So this state of exile, concealment, and obstruction to a point where the person can feel overpowered by the world, and this is the starting point of exile. On the other hand, when you remember you have chosen us from all the peoples, you exalted us, nothing will affect us by virtue of an awareness that Israel is beyond all, for then there is no exile. And I have to say, I was watching some videos and different things on Tisha B'Av, and I saw a clip on Natan Sharansky. And he was saying that when he was put on trial, he talked about his whole journey of not even understanding what a Jew is and not knowing about being a Jew, and how that developed for him until he began to fight for his rights and to be a Jew and to be connected to Israel. And when he was put on trial and he was facing a terrible jail sentence, and the court said to him, "We'll give you a final word. What would you like to say to the court?" And he said, "To the court, I have nothing to say. To my fellow Jews, Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim." It just like caught me in my heart. It was just so powerful to see a person who could rise above Gullus, who could rise above that exile, and understand that he is chosen. We are chosen, and you exalted us, and nothing will affect him by virtue of an awareness that Israel is beyond all. So God provides. We have to understand God provides for us, and we have to turn towards Torah. We have to see with those eyes. And it goes on to say that the perception of the world at large as a vast desert leads to a further decline of not seeing it only as a vast desert, but what did we say before? A dreadful one. Vast means bigger than big, but worse is dreadful. And what does dreadful imply? Fear of the other. To think that the other person has power and authority over them. The perception of a vast and dreadful desert, however, instills fear of the world, even within one's own little niche. No matter where you are, at home, in shul, whatever, one will be afraid sometimes to observe Torah and mitzvahs openly for fear lest the world find out about this, and what will the nation say? I remember one year, so Lubavitch organization sends out young boys and girls, let's say, like in their late teens, early 20s, to different countries around the world in the summers, especially many years ago when there weren't even shluchim or Chabad houses in these different countries, to help the rabbis or the communities there. And I remember my son Mesh and another friend were going to be in Turkey for the summer, and they flew to Turkey, and it was right when there was this terrible bombing in a synagogue. I'm sure there's been more than one bombing. I just remember this one, where maybe 18 people were killed in a synagogue in Turkey, and they came, and they were immediately, the Chabad headquarters in New York was called that they have to leave. They're too obviously Jewish. They look too Jewish. And they requested that they don't wear their yarmulkes. They put baseball caps on, and they walk in the streets for the 3 days until they could get them on a plane out of the country, because they did not want them to openly walk around for fear. What would the nation say? Which it's not a criticism, because when bombs are going off, you can understand where that came from. So this condition leads to the next decline, which is a place of serpents. So it's very interesting about serpents. So it says that nakash, snake, serpents, that their poison is hot. And a serpent implies the embroilment in matters of holiness, in the heat of passion, not in holiness, in the opposite of holiness, in the heat of the world, meaning passions. Hot, got hot passion for something, passions, fire has to do with hot. And it says this lessens when you have a hot passion for something that is of the world, it lessens your involvement in matters of holiness, and it leads even further down to vipers. So passions, the heat of the world is called passions. Vipers are called addictions. And we know that nakash, the word for snake, the gematria is 358, and that is the gematria of the word for Mashiach. So we know that when a person has these vipers, these addictions, they can come to believe that those addictions, those snakes, are really Mashiach. That's their Mashiach in their life. And this embroilment in worldly matters will be so intense that not only will it lessen a person's involvement with holiness, but it will burn it up altogether. And then it will take that person to even a lower level, which is the scorpion. So of the scorpion, it is said that its poison is cold, not hot like the snake, but cold. And there are actually more venomous scorpions than there are snakes. And this level is worse than a serpent and a viper. Heat and vehemence, even when it's related to worldly matters, is a sign of life and vitality. Even though it's presently in a negative context, it can be converted to matters of holiness. Coldness, however, is symptomatic of the opposite of life, and it's much worse. So also the word for scorpion, akrav, in the middle of it is two letters that form the word kar, which means cold. So there's a coldness, there's an apathy. There's a very interesting story of the Baal Shem Tov, and it says he had his students come and he taught his doctrine of divine providence. And he said, whatever comes in front of you, whatever comes in front of your eyes, is meant for you to see. It's divine providence. So I think it was the first time he was teaching his students the concept of divine providence. So they left his study hall and they went through the town, and all of a sudden they see a parade coming through the town of priests and Christians carrying a large ice cross. It was winter, and they cut this huge cross out of the ice of the river, and they're parading around holding this ice cross. And the students went back to the Baal Shem Tov, and they said, how could this be Hashgacha Pratis? What could possibly an ice cross have to do with us? And the Baal Shem Tov said, don't let your practice of Judaism become like an ice cross, meaning water needs to be flowing. It needs to have vitality to it. That's the way you need to serve God. Don't do mitzvahs like you're carrying an ice cross, something that's full of coldness, something that has no life in it. That's how it relates to you. And it says, and all this, now we've talked about the desert and the vast desert and the dreadful desert and the serpents and the vipers and the scorpions. Now we're going descending even further, thirst, where there is no water. So it says, even when stirred from above, for example, it says that every day a heavenly voice urges people to mend their ways and return to God. So the question is asked, what purpose does this serve if you don't hear the voice? So the Baal Shem Tov explains that the physical ear of man does not hear the voice, but the soul hears. And that is, how do we understand that? Because we see in people that every so often, thoughts of tshuva, of return, appear to that person for no apparent reason. And it says the thoughts come from the soul hearing this voice that goes out, which is a stirring from above. And it says a divine favor is awakening in the person to mend their ways. So it says that a person can be in the state of thirst, and there is still no water, which refers to Torah. And he senses the thirst, but does not even know what they're thirsty for. The person is so far removed that they have lost any sense of connection, and they are unaware of the concept of holiness. And what led to all this? It started with the idea of a vast desert, from conferring significance to the desert, which means the world, which is hard not to. You have to be strong. And this is the very first step on the continuous decline down to thirst where there is no water. And the remedy, here we go. What is the remedy? The remedy for all these descents requires that one correct the first cause. Remember, it says we're going to learn, how do we descend into Gullus? How did we descend into exile? One must be strong in all matters of Judaism, remembering that you have chosen us from all the peoples. You have raised us up. This is how we move through Gullus. We get rid of Gullus, exile, so that we can be led by Mashiach into the good and spacious land. And there is another ruling from the Zohar. It says, if a snake is wound around one's heel, one is not to interrupt their prayer. But if it is a scorpion, one breaks it off. So there's many details to the snake. It's not a poisonous snake. You're not afraid for your life. It's just around your heel. And if you're in the standing prayer, it says you continue to pray. If you're terrified, okay, this is just your average person with the average snake wound around its heel that knows it's not going to bite it. It knows it's not poisonous. It might be a little annoying, but they continue to pray. But not if it's a scorpion. So it says, when suddenly seized in the midst of prayer by the heat of the world, meaning the snake that is wound around the heel. Eikev comes from the word heel, means the word heel. This is not okay, but one does not have to break off praying. One continues because it is an indication that there is life in the person, and the person can convert the heat of the snake with vitality to matters of holiness. They're alive, they're vital, their blood is heated, they can move in any direction. If a scorpion is wound around the heel, that is, in the midst of praying, if a person is seized by a coldness, they should break off. This scorpion, this cold poison, may be wound only around the person's foot and their heel, and it does not touch their mind or heart. Even so, the person should stop praying, because the fact that they can be seized by coldness, meaning a lack of life, in the midst of their prayer, shows that this approach, this coldness to what they're doing, is not correct. This kind of approach needs to be stopped and discontinued and replaced by another. The person has to seek a way to find a service that's filled with vitality. And how do we fill our service with vitality? We study Panemius HaTorah, the Hasidus, the Kabbalah, the inner teaching of the Torah, which is referred to as the tree of life. So I want to say l'chaim on my water from my Sheva Chaya gorgeous glass, and I want to actually tell two stories, okay? One story I haven't told, I think, since I lived on Navy Street, for whoever came there, but it has to do with a snake. It's one of my only snake stories, and I was reminded of it. So I read this story when I was in Israel, actually, in a newspaper. Gosh, so if it must have been like in the 1970s, or maybe when I went back for a visit. It must have been when I went back for a visit, because it happened after the war during the time that America was in the war in Afghanistan. And it was a soldier who eventually came to Israel. So he told this story that when he was serving in the armed forces, in America, when he was serving in the armed forces, he was, they were in a desert. They were somewhere in the Afghani desert. And he was, I don't know what you would call it. I'm sure some bright person whose name I can't see. I want to just say I'm not saying hello to anybody because I have a new setup and I have to kind of go very close and get on top of my phone to see your name. So I really don't see you. But I see these little white spaces popping up. But he was a person who studied reptiles. He was very involved in reptology. I know I'm making that up, but somebody I'm sure will correct me. So he was involved with reptiles, and for the few weeks that they were stationed in this certain place, there was a cobra snake. I actually was in India and walking through a field, and there was a cobra. That was pretty terrifying. So there was a cobra, and he kind of like developed a relationship with the cobra. I don't know how you have a relationship with a cobra, but like he would go and he would sit and watch it, and the cobra was aware of him, and and he would spend hours out in the desert, and he was a person who had some kind of connection. I don't know how, but there are people like that. And he would see this cobra every day, from a distance. He wasn't stupid enough to go near it like a woman. I saw a clip of a woman in a park, and she thought it would be very cute to take a picture of her with a bear, and then the bear turned around and ran after her, and she ran screaming, but she was okay. So he kept a distance, and the cobra would, move around, and then it would go back into its little hole or whatever. And it came to be that they were told that the next day that their troops were going to be moving. They were fighting in Afghanistan. They were fighting a war. I don't know if they were fighting the Russians or they were fighting the Afghanis. I'm not really sure exactly. So they were going to be moving on. And he wanted to go back in the field one last time to have this communication with this snake, with this cobra. And when he was there, the cobra came closer and then took this pose, you know, the attack pose, where it lifts up and its hood is back, and he froze. And for hours and hours, that cobra stood like that. And he knew his troops were moving on, and he was going to get into big trouble. But that cobra was too close and was in an attack mode, and he couldn't move. And after many hours passed, that cobra, like, you know, went back down and just slithered away. And he ran back to where he left the troops and where they had started to move. And he found every single one of them was killed. There had been some kind of battle, altercation, I don't know what, and the whole entire troop was wiped out. And that cobra saved his life. And that's why he was interviewed, and it was written in the paper in Israel. So I want to end with a story, a very poignant story, and I want to bring it back to Tu B'Av, since we're in the end. It might be Tu B'Av still in Hawaii, because Hawaii, yeah, probably is Tu B'Av still in Hawaii. My dear friend Hani Marcus that lives there on Maui. So, so this story has something to do with it, because it talks about the dress and the beauty of the women of Jerusalem, the daughters of Jerusalem. So let's go back to that. So this story, I'm sure that everybody who's watching this has heard of the massacre that took place in India, in Mumbai, India, in the Chabad house there, that the Chabad Shluchim and 6 other guests of theirs were slaughtered brutally. And the Rivki Holtzberg, her name was Rosenberg or Rosenfeld, I'm not exactly sure. Her family lived in Afula. My husband knew her family. And they were sitting Shiva in Israel. And when they, I think it was Rosenberg, and when they were sitting Shiva, a young girl, a young Israeli girl, walked into Mrs. Rosenfeld, Rivki Holtzberg's mother, and she had a package with her. And she said, I need to give you this package. And her mother thought it was unusual because you don't give presents, but she took it, she got up, she went to a corner with this girl, and she opened it up. And she took out this absolutely beautiful dress that had been Rivki's, one of her most beautiful Shabbos dresses. And she took out from this package her diamond ring, her beautiful engagement, big diamond ring. And the girl told her the following. In Israel, I don't know how many of you know, but after the army service, huge amounts of young Israelis traveled to very inexpensive places in the world, like India and South America. Now, mostly it was only India, then it became South America, because they live in a state of constant war. They've either been in battle, they've had friends who have been killed. It's a very difficult way to live when you're 18, 19, and 20. And I just want to say, l'chaim, that my beautiful grandson, Ari, who's in the IDF, Aaron David Ben Esther, should be protected along with all the other beautiful Israeli soldiers that are fighting for Israel and keeping Judaism a place where we can be safe from anti-Semitism and hatred in the world. So these young kids, they travel and they go to India, and there's 60,000 a year, 60,000 Israelis that were visiting in Israel a year. And there are Chabad houses all over different places. So this young Israeli girl says she went to Israel after the army. And she said that she was touring India, and she was young, and she did a lot of foolish things, and she broke the law. Now, it's interesting because for some reason, everybody who comes to India thinks that drug use, selling, buying, and carrying is legal, and it is totally illegal. It is absolutely illegal. So, and she was arrested and she was put in prison. And she said she's telling Rivki's mother that the Indian prison, she said she doesn't even know how to describe how scary it was and how primitive and how dangerous. It was just horror, horror, horror. But she said there was one source of solace, is that you could bribe. Like, they were very open to bribery, and it still exists today. You know, bribery is present. And she was able to have people, family and other people, send her money, bring her money, and she was able to bribe the guards in the prison that they looked the other way, and she escaped from the prison. And in India, it's known, if you are in trouble, if you are an Israeli in trouble, there is the Chabad houses, and the Chabad houses have been help for getting many Israelis out of trouble with the law, police, jail, many difficult situations, illness, whatever it is. And she went to the Chabad house, and she said that Rivki opened the door and welcomed her like a sister and fed her, and then she poured out her heart, and she told her her problem, and she told her what happened. And Rivki said to her, "You have to get out of the country immediately." And this girl said to her, you know, how am I going to get out of the country? I'm an escapee from the prison. They're going to flag my passport no matter where I go, and they're going to recapture me. I don't know. I can't leave. I don't know what to do. And Rivki went over to her closet, and she took out her most beautiful dress that she had, and she took off from her hand her diamond ring, and she said to this girl, "You're going to put this ring on, you're going to wear this dress, you're going to dress up, you're going to look beautiful, and then you're going to leave." Because in India, they are impressed by things like this. And and they're not going to look too carefully. They're going to see a beautiful, beautiful dress and the diamond and a wealthy woman, and they're not going to look twice. And even if your name comes up, they're going to think, they're not going to notice. It's not going to be important, because they won't believe that you were the person that escaped from prison, because everything here is about looks. And she said, "I took the gown and I took the ring, and I easily got out of the country." And the mother said to her, the last time I visited Rivki, I asked her, "Where is your diamond ring?" And she said, "Oh, my ring went on a mission." That's all she said. So I just think this story is so beautiful for Tu B'Av, because it talks about the beauty. And what did the daughters of Jerusalem do? They each took off their own dresses and they gave them to their sisters, so that there would be like an equal playing field. And so I just want to share this story because it's so beautiful. It represents the love of a fellow Jew and what we could do for each other, and that we have to care for each other on that level, as that we're sisters and brothers. And I recently, when I became, I don't want to call it a prisoner in my own house, because it's not a prison, and I can get out, but I don't go too far. But when this started, and I wanted to read some books, because I had a lot of time on my hands. So I found a book called The Autobiography of Golda Meir. And I read it, and I was just blown away by the book on many, many levels. There were things I learned that I didn't know. First of all, her writing is absolutely extraordinary. As a fellow writer, I was just so impressed. And when she talked about coming to the United States and raising money for Israel, not in 1995, not in 2020, not in times when there was a tremendous affluence in America, but in the times in the late 40s and in the 50s, raising $50 million, because going from place to place, saying that Israel won't survive, and people mortgaging their houses, and the level of commitment and care that people and other Jews poured in to help our fellow Jews in Israel. And really, it says this is how the Beis HaMikdash will be built, when we have this love, this tremendous love and unity. So I want to bless everybody for good health, for a beautiful week. L'chaim on my beautiful Sheva Chaya cup. I hope to get a new set when I get to Israel. So we will have class next week. Maybe it'll be from Jerusalem with Mashiach. So I want to encourage everybody again. Next week, I'm going to tell a mind-blowing candlelighting story. It's a very long story, and as a reward for everybody, and I'm going to again ask people, please go out at a distance in your neighborhood, find a house with a mezuzah, bring Shabbos candles, if you're going to the dry cleaner, if you're, I don't know wherever you're going, call up your Aunt Sadie, who's 100 years old and has never lit candles. But let's get 2 more women to light candles this week to bring holiness and peace and health to the world. And trust me, people won't say no. They just won't say no. So, go on these different sites, learn more Torah, do more mitzvahs, and hopefully I'll be seeing you in Israel next week and not in Los Angeles. So anyway, thank you very much, and we'll see each other soon. I'm going to turn this off.